Well, thank you, Jason. As we finish up today, what Noel and I are going to do is first we're going to talk about the sessions this morning, and I'm going to highlight the two sessions that I sat in on, then Noel's going to highlight the other two sessions, and then we're going to come back with some of overall impressions to give you kind of a game plan. So first off, as I start off, I really enjoyed this morning that it allowed us to highlight just a few of the graduate students and undergraduates that have been involved in the projects, and I hope that you got the same feeling as I did in terms of the quality of individuals that we're able to work with. And I think in the two sessions I was in, we saw 6 of the over 60 students that have been involved in actually running projects as part of this grant, and I think that's been certainly one of the highlights for me as somebody at the university level, watching that growth in those students. First on the pre-weaning survival session, just give you highlights for those that weren't in that pre-weaning session. One of the grad student projects was on providing enrichment using a milky cheese flavor on ropes to increase pig interaction with those ropes. It allowed them to do that and pull the piglets away from the udder in order to, from that day 2 to about 6 of after they were born, to try to reduce mortality. And they were able to successfully reduce mortality with that. And so an area that obviously we need to do more work on to try to, before we take it out into practice, but I think taking that into bigger numbers is certainly worth looking at further. Also, the area in pre-weaning survival, there's a couple nutrition trials. We heard a little bit yesterday about feeding sows more frequently, and the work that Kia shared with us about how often we feed that sow before they farrow, and whether we do them ad lib or multiple meals per day. We're able to reduce the pre-weaning mortality and farrowing assistance with more frequent feeding, as long as we don't feed them too much. And I think that's really the answer that comes out of that research is feeding multiple times per day has been beneficial, but going ad libitum, you can create other issues potentially. Essential fatty acid research has shown, in the research North Carolina State's done, has shown the improvements in the summertime of providing essential fatty acids through like soybean oil in order to improve subsequent reproductive performance. The work that Julia shared with us showed that it didn't have an impact on subsequent reproductive performance in her trials, but it did increase weaning weights, and she provided a really nice, very large data set that we're able to see what the impact was on the economic benefits of that fat addition on weaning weights, and also the fact that in her trials it did not impact the survival of the pigs, having the different fatty acid profiles in the milk and the colostrum. And then some of the work that Purdue's done on getting pigs to away from the back of the sow and to the udder. It showed very nice work about they able to get them to suckle quicker than if they were at the back of the sow, and their temperature drop was less, or they got their temperature to recover more quickly by getting them up near that sow and getting colostrum intake. An interesting one on some of Kara Stewart's farrowing induction work that I had never really given much thought to was that it did increase the likelihood of those sows farrowing by day 115, which is the reason you do induction. But the downside of the induction was it decreased the duration of colostrum production. And I think that's a very interesting one when we talk about the need for getting colostrum intake into piglets, and something we better think about when we're doing farrowing induction. And also in Kara's main presentation, the couple of big key points that came out of there was that there were 65 to 70% of the mortality is from pigs that are over 1 kilogram at birth. And so we think about those small pigs, and certainly as a percentage of their population, they have the highest percent mortality. But if we look at the overall mortality of piglets before farrowing, the big majority of the overall mortality is still coming from those larger pigs. And 40% of their mortality is due to crushing. And so again, all the things that we know to do about reducing crushing in those first 24 to 48 hours is what to save those big pigs. Also, the work that shows that pigs are born to a variable size litter, they have a much higher chance of dying than if they're born to a uniform size litter. That really, I think, provides opportunities from the genetic selection standpoint. She brought up the issues of potential vascularity in the placenta, and also the selection for robustness and genetically. I know we have a lot of things we have to select for, but that's a relatively easy one in terms of the variation in piglet size at birth to mix in. Many of the things that are being done on farms to reduce mortality, she brought up the point that we don't have very good data to support a lot of the activities. Some of the excellent work that University of Illinois has done about drying piglets has shown that they were only able to reduce the mortality of the lightweight pigs when it was cold in the farrowing house. In a normal temperature, they had no impact on it. But I think she did also point out that people doing other things to save pigs while they're there, and that's one of the things I think we keep finding in some of our research trials, is one of the reasons we may not find some of the significant effects that sometimes people think they're having, or when they implement some of these strategies, is that we tend to have a lot of people there at the time when we're doing those trials, and we probably save some of the pigs in the other litters also that may not have been saved if we weren't there doing it. I think probably the biggest thing that some of the discussion came out of there was that the technology that is, now that we're able to track individual pigs, is really going to help us in this overall pre-weaning mortality area, not only tracking how those pigs live all the way to the end of the nursery, but all the way to market weight, is what impact do we really have on lifetime productivity and on those pigs. The post-weaning area also had some discussion about the nutritional enrichments. The post-wean mortality was able to show that with mat feeding, with large cubes, with biscuits, a number of different strategies to do sensory attractants to get pigs to the feeders. Those all help to reduce the weight loss of the pigs immediately after weaning, but they didn't change overall growth rate or feed efficiency of the pigs. The body weight loss and fallout rate can be improved through strategic management, but there was more work, again, that needs to be taken to understand the long-term impact. And again, the technology and individual pig tracking is really what's needed to be able to do that. Deb Murray finished up that session with a lot of practical thoughts on vaccination programs, on the negatives of over-medication, of using too much antibiotics, about barn cleaning and biosecurity and water line cleaning, many of the things that we obviously need to teach and verify that people are doing in the barns that we know will reduce disease issues. There was a number of really good follow-up ideas that came out of that discussion, and I think any of that weren't there, I think that we really want to go back and review Dr. Murray's presentation and the discussion that came after it, because there was an awful lot of good research ideas that we're certainly going to follow up on.
Thanks, Mike. I had the opportunity to sit on the sow mortality, breeding herd mortality presentation. Dr. Ross's graduate students, Jamie and Zoe, and again, I echo Mike's comments about being able to hear the graduate student work and how invigorating that is to see the research that they've done and have them involved in the industry. But they did a great job of the continuation of the work that Jason started with a POP study and looking specifically at some of the changes in the microbiome in a control farm and a farm that had a higher incidence level of POP scores and perineal scores, and being able to detect some differences between the two in terms of changes in microbiome. And then their challenge now is to see if they can alter that microbiome, and with some different either nutritional strategies or potentially antibiotic strategies to be able to evaluate that, see if they can change, and see ultimately if they can change the incidence of POP. And I think a tremendous model, good work that has been done, the incidence of POP, but also utilizing the perineal score to estimate that and predict that, which is a very good predictor of it, and then following that up with the microbiome work, and now the application of that microbiome work. So that was good. It's good to see that basic research combined with a practical application. Just excellent work. Chris Rodemaker followed that up with a very practical talk, and I would encourage everyone to watch all the videos, but in terms of short-term things that you could do to potentially change breeding herd mortality, he was able to demonstrate over the course of about a 3-month period of some process changes in process allocation, time allocation within a sow farm, about a 3.5% to 4% improvement in sow mortality by focus on individual care, but also really reprioritization and refocus how the breeding, this was a gestation study, trial, but how just a change in focus there, they've been able to demonstrate about a 3.5% and 4% reduction in sow mortality just by changing daily processes and really focusing on individual pig care. So that was good work. Dr. Dean followed that up with an excellent discussion of the frustrations associated with looking at sow breeding herd mortality. Just a good walkthrough from a epidemiologic standpoint, how frustrating it is, and re-emphasizing the importance of collecting good data. You can only make good decisions when you have good data. Some practical tips there. Really talked about lameness, and one of his take-home messages was you can't just measure lameness on a dead sow. You need to identify it on a sow that survives as well. And so put lame or not lame on every farrowing card, and then you'll be able to collect better information and then look and see the impact on productivity as well as mortality. So that was a good presentation. And I think one of the comments that he made that really hit home, he said, what is finished when the lights are turned out at the end of the day or the end of the week, okay? And he equated that to what chores have been done, what's the focus or priority on that farm when the lights go out, okay? What have you got done? And he talked about, have you individually cared for every sow? Have you treated every sow? So again, focusing on your priorities, but really think of it, when the lights go out, what have you accomplished from the day, and are you doing the right things? And then one other point on the studies that they did and demonstrated from the graduate student work was a study done in collaboration with a cactus group looking at BMD and potentially changing that microbiome and influencing prolapses. Did not have an impact on prolapses, but interestingly had a significant impact on stillborn. So I would encourage you to look at that data. We also had the opportunity to sit down on the post-weaning mortality from the finishing standpoint. Two excellent Iowa State presentations. One, Edison from Iowa State, looking at some specific data sets, looking at predictors of grow-finish mortality based upon sow herd status, different diseases, and other environmental impacts. And to me, I think, good data, if you have good data in a large data set, we've got the tools and application to be able to look at that and one, find out predictors of mortality. But, a lot of things we've talked about over the last couple of days is where do we devote our resources? Where do we devote our capital? And what that data demonstrates, and that may be unique to one system, is these are the areas that you need to focus on because these are the big predictors of grow-finish mortality. And I think the message is utilizing that type of data in that way, it allows you to focus on that. So, a good model that can be utilized in other systems as well. Dr. Holkamp talked about the importance of finishing biosecurity and the impact that disease can have on finishing mortality, but also the impact that it has on sow farms. We talked about that yesterday with the veterinarian from High Tech about how those growing pigs or incubators, I think is what she called them, and improving grow-finish biosecurity may have a direct impact on grow-finish mortality, but also an impact on sow herd health, particularly if your sows are in that area. Then we got to hear Dr. Pillen talk about his experiences in the industry. It's always great to hear. He talked about, and Brett used some examples of things that he talked about of his 50-some-odd years in the industry. And one of the points he made, he had the 95-5 rule, and it really tied into what we've talked about the last couple of days, because he's a veterinarian by training. He said, but 95% of it's the people or the processes, the resources that we give to the people are the big impactors on mortality in this particular case. And so good to hear from him and his advice. And then in the open sessions, good information exchange. I'd encourage you to listen to those, both from a research idea perspective, but there was also some good practical tips during the discussion associated with both the sow mortality side as well as the grow finish side.
All right, thank you, Noel. As we finish up, if we get the slides up, what I'm going to cover in just in a few slides here is to talk about three big areas, trying to wrap up my thoughts on the area in terms of lowering mortality as an industry. First thing, obviously, is we want to implement what we know. So let's talk about what we know. Then, what do we need to research that we don't know? And then, finally, we heard yesterday about some of this, is do we need to change our paradigm in terms of, are there new swine production models that we should be considering as an industry? So first, what do we know? Well, we all know that increasing birth weight increases survival. And it was very nice to hear Bill Christensen talking about, and I know PIC has done an excellent job down this area, and I know a number of the genetic companies are realizing and are moving this same direction in terms of that increase in birth weight. The best way that we can do that is through our genetic selection. They have a much greater impact than what we can have as nutritionists. Yes, we can influence birth weight a little bit from the diet, but it's a very small impact as compared to what you can do with selection. Okay. Pigs need a minimum of 200 grams of colostrum intake. Kara Stewart challenged that a little bit in the session this morning, said that probably should be closer to 300 grams of intake instead of 200. But you can argue about that, but the reality is that we know that we need to get colostrum into those pigs or we're going to lose them very, very early in the farrowing house. The causes of pre-weaning mortality haven't changed. That's probably the biggest thing. Yes, we have a lot more pigs today, but if you look at the causes of pre-weaning mortality in papers that were written in the 80s, they're the same causes of pre-weaning mortality as papers that are written with data from today. Okay? So the first 48 hours, 50% of pre-weaning mortality. Late on, low viable, and starvation is 76% of pre-weaning mortality. And so it's not very difficult to figure out where our target is at and where the emphasis needs to be placed in the farrowing house if we're going to reduce that number. Survival increases as weaning age increases to 24 days of age. That data is becoming more and more clear the more data sets we have, and some excellent work that Adam Mosier's done at Michigan State University to show the biological reasons why that occurs, and shows that as you get those pigs up to 24 days of age, the reason that they have improved survival all the way out to market is because you fundamentally changed their intestine and how you can get pathogens across their intestine all the way till that pig gets to market. So we need to get pigs to at least 24 days of age as an industry. I know we've got a lot of reasons that people don't do that, but we need to get there. Okay? Mortality increases with increased stocking density. Chris Rodemaker showed that very nicely yesterday, and I think there's relatively little of that data in the literature, but I know there's more of those data sets and production systems that have shown those kind of effects. It's real, it's believable. That's one of the areas where the stocking density and stocking correctly, we know that can have an impact. And genetic selection, we all know this, genetic selection works. We get what we select for. And so if we keep selecting for increased growth and leanness and feed efficiency and don't put in the robustness traits, we're not going to improve robustness. If we don't select for reducing mortality, we're not going to get there. Okay. What else do we know? We know health is king. I mean, this is one, married to a veterinarian, and I know she has a much bigger impact on the outcome of that farm than what I do as a nutritionist. I mean, that's reality. If the diseases come into that farm, there's not a lot that I can do to help keep those pigs alive in many cases as a nutritionist. The sow farm source drives downstream mortality. That was just highlighted as what Noel was talking about in the presentations this morning. But the interesting one that is starting to come out again is that finishing pig mortality actually leads sow farm mortality when we look at a region or we look at season of the year. That's the data Iowa State's pulling together shows this very nicely now, is that finishing pig mortality is going up before sow herd mortality is going up, and disease breaks, I should say, are happening. So disease breaks are happening in the finishing barns before the sow farms. So we're dragging those diseases back and then creating too much of a population of virus that then is infecting the sow farms. So this is one that I know is, again, a very, very difficult one to solve, but we heard an excellent presentation from High Life yesterday about the packing plants and controlling those packing plants because they are an amplifier of disease in our industry. It's because we bring the disease into the plant. It's not their fault. We bring the disease in, and then because we're not careful, we don't clean, we don't wash. When we take the trucks back, we bring those diseases back, and then we move them back down through the system to the farrowing house. And that's we're not going to get our PRRS under control as an industry until we control finishing pig biosecurity and take it seriously. What else do we know? I've heard this several times yesterday and this morning. People are the key. Mortality is really hard on morale. We know that we need to watch our language and our message, and this is one, it's a message for me. I'm not a very F-feeling type, but it's one that I know this, that I need to be careful how I talk about mortality, how I talk about pigs. I think we all do, that they're a valuable resource that we need to make sure that they are taught, treat them as a baby pig that they are, and not just as an economic unit. And we need technology to focus our labor on high return activities. And this one, we've done some of this as an industry. I mean, going to automated feeding in the farrowing house has been one of the greatest examples of taking people out of that task and allowing them to use their time for other things. We need to continue to innovate to get other technologies. And we need to be the advocate for the pig. And I know there's a number of you in the audience that do a tremendous job of this. And it's one that we need to continue, all of us in the room, become advocates for the pig, because the pig can't advocate for itself. Research what we don't know. I'm not going to talk about specific research areas very much, but I do want to put some areas in here. Is that we want to thank the farms that do open their doors to us and allow us to conduct large-scale research on mortality. It's been brought up several times that we can't answer these questions in a university setting. We have to do this in large scale in the field. We've got some extremely high-quality students. They are limited on their time, too, and have other duties, but getting them into those production systems is not only good for you having the data collected in your units, but it's tremendous experiences for those students to be in those units and see what happens firsthand. And for many of them, it's their biggest time that, other than an internship, that they spend in a unit. Graduate students and undergraduate students are really the key for us in solving a lot of these industry issues, because they are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, and so we need to keep getting them exposed. And then the researchers in the room, I know a lot of you know this already, but we need to keep partnering with systems to test in these large-scale real-world situations. The sow prolapse one, what Jason Ross has done, I think is a tremendous example. No, we don't have all the answers from that yet, but we've learned a tremendous amount that we didn't know before, being able to open up the doors to an awful lot of production units around the country. And then the discussion on technology to tracking individual pigs. I think we're going to have to do this on a much bigger basis in a lot more farms in order to really understand what's going on with the pigs, so that we can track them all the way to market and see where that fallout is at. And then I'll just finish with changing our paradigms. This is one that, again, I'm not a futurist, but I keep thinking about this new model of pork production and what should we consider. And I don't know what this model needs to be, but in the past, you think about the things we've reinvented our industry for already is multi-site production, wean to finish, filtered sow farms. You could probably add a number of things on this where we've really reinvented the way that we produce pigs. In the future, what's it going to look like? I don't know. This multi-suckle common creep really interests me, and especially Randy Stacker has approached us a couple times about doing these farrowing intensive care units. And I've thought about this with multi-suckle common creep. Is that an area where you could have a focused intensive care farrowing facility, and then you move those sows when they're 2 days old, piglets are 2 days old, to this multi-suckle common creep room where you don't have all the investment, and you handle that like we handle nurseries or finishers today. I mean, there's a lot of, and then you can get people hired into that ICU that have more of the skills that we need and run the number of sows across them. Those kind of things that we need to think about. The fortress biosecurity we heard yesterday, restricted intake and gilt development. We've heard a lot about how we need to raise our gilts differently. We know if we slow it down that it helps us on longevity, but we continually refuse to do it in the U.S. And that's just an example of where we need to think about what can we do to change our paradigms and how we raise pigs. With that, I'll turn it over to Noel.
Thanks, Mike. Mike's the smartest guy in the room. I should have kept his notes. So I think Mike did an excellent job of summarizing. I'm just going to end on a couple of three different things. One, when it comes to foreign animal disease, I would encourage everybody to run their business knowing that foreign animal disease is most likely on our soil, and you've got to be prepared. We have to be prepared from a business continuity standpoint and a preparation if we go into wartime. And I know we've talked a lot about that, but I think the reality is it's going to happen. You know, Gustavo had a 2035 retirement yesterday in his slide, and it kind of hit me because that's when my last kid graduates from high school. That's kind of my retirement date too. In my career, it will happen on these shores. I'm convinced of that. And I believe that you need to have that in your business plan and in your daily operation. Preparation is going to be key. I really believe that. Secondly, I don't know if Brett's still here. I would put a call out to continue this project, the survivability. You know, you talked about the important, and maybe we change the name to sustainability, right? I think this project has been great. I feel honored to be able to participate in it. I think it's been a great project, the collaboration. We're seeing some of the fruits of the results. We're going to continue to have some in the forward. It's not done yet, but I think it's something that we should continue. And just one thing to end up on, you know, is Mike talks about the future, and I'm not a futurist either. Most scientists aren't trained to be futurists, right? We spend our whole careers trying to mitigate risks, right? Whether that be in biosecurity, and that creates a type of thinking that keeps us from having some of those futuristic thoughts. So one thing I want to challenge the group is, I would encourage you to get this audio book or read this book. It's called Loon Shots: The Science of Generating Crazy Ideas. And what this book does is talk about the science behind the culture that you have to create as a business to generate crazy ideas. It talks about moonshots, far-reaching goals, you know, 10,000 or doubling pork production by 2035, or some of the things we talked about. But then it talks about loon shots. And what a loon shot is are those crazy ideas that come to fruition that allow you to achieve that moonshot. And it takes a different mentality. You've got to get out of that risk mitigation mentality. And it talks about artists. And artists are the true people that create those crazy ideas. And you got to stop being a risk mitigator to be an artist. I would encourage you to look at that. But the bottom line message is, for your business, for your practice, for your farming operation, spend time generating those crazy ideas. It takes a different mentality. It takes a different mindset. It takes time. But for us to achieve the goals that we talked about over the last couple of days, for us to have a sustainable business, to have a license to operate, we've got to spend time. And this is a tremendous group, a very committed, very smart people, but we have to spend time generating those crazy ideas. So I'm going to end there, but I would encourage you to look at that. I thank everybody that on the committee, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of it, and I'll turn it back over to Jason.
That was a great way to wrap up the day with those last three speakers. I think we couldn't have ended any better. I just want to reiterate a few things that have soaked in for me, and one of the first things I want to do is thanks everybody for being here, right? And thank you to the sponsors for helping make this happen. That's National Pork Board and FR, but all the company sponsors and allied partners that helped chip in to make this conference a reality, that we could all be here today. I want to thank the speakers. Those are leaders in the industry, thought leaders in the industry, idea generators, all of the above, right? And those are the type of people that you got to get together and bring them in the same room and have these conversations to identify the next play, the next challenge, the next direction that needs to be pursued. The grant team of PIs between K-State, Purdue, and Iowa State, it's just, I think when you see today, that's kind of the fruits of what we've been doing, but it's one of the best teams I've ever worked on. So it's just fortunate that we have the partners that we have, and then you expand that into the advisory group that's given us direction, and the leadership that we have from that group, and the involvement then on a meeting like this, and the engagement of everybody. As I said yesterday, this is part of the consortium. Everybody's involved in this process. Obviously, then there's the conference team, and Stacy, you've just did a tremendous job. You don't just roll out of bed and have a conference like this where everything works. And everybody has been so complimentary of this meeting, and I really appreciate that. But I would say Joel and Stacy have done so much and thought about so many of these small details that's where the thanks should be directed, is at those two. The other thing I wanted to point out is one of the objectives I said at the starting off yesterday was we wanted to learn from each other. I hope you came in with that attitude, and I hope you did learn something from each other and exchange these ideas. The other thing I suggest is that we want to adopt and implement, and I hope there's something that you thought about how it can fit into your system, how it can fit into your business, if you support producers, if you support pork production. And I hope you go home with the intention to implement it. The other thing I said is we have to think differently. And I think that's what Noel just made that comment too. And I hope that you're challenging yourself to think differently. It's not easy. Thinking differently requires you to challenge dogma and challenge the way that we're doing things and really question, are we doing it the right way? And so I hope you go home and think about the dogma in your business or those facts that we've accepted as true and challenge them and see what you can do differently. One of the things that we need to continue to discuss is what's the path forward? How do we continue this, right? There's been so many great ideas and, not only just from the podiums, but the hallway conversations. How do we continue to make sure that those ideas are percolating to the top and getting traction? And one of the things that we will be doing after the conference is sending out a survey. And I just really encourage you, I know how these post-conference surveys are, right? You can swipe so easy and can it. But I would encourage you to just give some thought, right? As part of this team, what's your advice? What are the things that this group of investigators and extension specialists need to think about to be more impactful? And put that in there. We will read it and we will have discussion with our advisory group and we'll consider it. We want your input, we want your feedback, and we want your involvement. Another survey, for example, is the producer survey that Kayla Miller and Nick Gabler are leading, and just understanding producer attitudes from caregivers to management and how they look at mortality and survivability. We have about 200 people have already completed that survey, and if you want to do that with just in your organization, you can reach out to Kayla and she can create a QR code so that you can send that to your employees and you can get that feedback within your system while also contributing data to the overall objective. So please be engaged with those things. Go to our website. Videos from this conference will be posted on the website in a few months, and help circulate it and help share what you think is valuable. The other thing I'll end with, and I love quotes. I guess it's just something that I do. I've got on my bulletin board behind the monitors in my office, I put quotes on pieces of paper and I print it out every so often when it gets updated. I think I got about 3 pages of quotes. And so as I was thinking about this conference the last few days, a couple of things, that I've heard. One thing was my baseball coach. He always said, anything worth doing is worth doing right. And that just keeps coming to mind, right? How much we do, all the stuff that we do in a barn, in the lab, in a conference, anything worth doing is worth doing right. The other thing, a guy named Mark Munoz, when I was in Stillwater, Oklahoma, I went to the same church as him. He had graduated and was working with John Smith because he was a 2-time NCAA champion and wrestled, I think, at 195 or 197, something like that. And I remember him saying one time, the way he approached things, he went on to be an MMA fighter, by the way, and was pretty good at that too. But I remember Mark one time saying, if you make your weaknesses your strengths, you won't have any weaknesses. So when you think about where our vulnerable points are as an industry and in your business, where those weaknesses are, consider putting the effort into making those your strengths. The other one, Rick Warren, if you've ever read The Purpose-Driven Life, Rick Warren is, one of his quotes is, when it's all said and done, more will be said than done. And that one, quite honestly, resonates when I think about conferences because there's a lot said and how much is going to get done when we leave. So keep that in mind. And then Ralph Waldo Emerson's another one. He said an ounce of action's worth a ton of theory. And so we can talk about a lot of things, but putting something into play is what really is going to make a difference ultimately. So an analogy to that is, I think we had some football analogies the last couple days, so I'll give another football analogy. And could you imagine if you were a coach of a team and you had 100 players on that team, you had, weight training staff, and you have guys that are drawn up watching film, you got students, you got recruiters, you got, player development, and just all the effort that goes into that. And then you get there on the field and you got fans, and you run up and you have the huddle, the center's rack in the huddle, and the quarterback comes up there and calls the play, and then they walk off the field, right? So the point is, we need to be thinking about what plays we have, and we need to be designing plays, but we need to run the plays. And so that's, I guess, the challenge to everybody in this room, whether you're in academia, whether you're in the industry producing pigs, whether you support producers because you're an allied industry, but find the plays in your playbook and see how they're changed based on this conference, and go run the play. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this. Thanks for our speakers. Let's give them all, the speakers, a round of applause.